This is Lingua Latina per se illustrata, Cap 7, Lesson 3. It's called Jump Back, Kiss Myself, which is a line from a James Brown song. It's all about reflexive pronouns versus another kind of pronoun, which we recognize as being an object pronoun, eum, eam. Let's get started. We're actually going to talk about three different things. The primary one is what I just mentioned, se versus eum, eam. We're also, however, going to talk about num versus nonne, and 3 points of style, et, neque, neque, and non solum sed etiam. The reflexive pronoun that we're learning today is the pronoun se. As you notice, we have our friend Julia here. And Julia is going to be looking at herself in the mirror. And the way we would say that in Latin is puella se in speculo videt. Julia is looking at herself, se, in the mirror. Puella se in speculo videt. When Sira comes in the room and she sees Julia, she doesn't see her crying. Why doesn't she see her crying? Well, she doesn't see her crying because Puella, or Julia, se non vertit. Sira non videt lacrimas Juliae cur, nam puella se non vertit. Vertere means to turn around. So when we say se non vertit, we're saying that Julia, puella, non vertit se. She doesn't turn herself around. Let's see this in another context. We're going to take Sira out of the picture and the speculum out of the picture. We're going to take, Sira doesn't want to go away. We're going to take Julia out of the picture, and now we're going to introduce Julius. Now, when Julius comes home, he comes in through the door. And when he goes in the door, he goes through the door into the villa, he closes it behind himself. So we would say, Julius in villam entrat, et ostium post se claudit. In other words, the door, ostium, post se claudit, meaning that he closes the door after or behind himself. Let's move the door out of the way. Oops, I'm going to take my line out there, if I can. We're going to move that door out of the way, and we're going to bring in Julius' son Marcus. Now, what does Julius do when he comes home with Marcus? Julius gives Marcus a malum. He gives his son an apple. And so what we do is we would say, before he can give him the apple, what does he have to do? Before he can give him the apple, he has to call Marcus to himself. How would we say that? Well, we would say, Julius Marcum ad se vocat. Ad se vocat. To himself. Ad se vocat. And then what does he do? After he calls him to himself, Julius ei, to him, ei, that should say malum, malum dat. Julius Marcum ad se vocat, calls him to himself, et ei malum dat. Let's see how this compares with a couple of pronouns that we had learned from a previous chapter. Here's our friend, here's our friend Julia again. Okay. And Julia's in her room, which of course you have to open a door to get into. And so when Sira comes in, Sira in cubiculum Juliae intrat, et Julia eam vidit. Julia eam vidit. And so what we're saying here is that Julia sees eam. Julia, another way of saying that would be Julia siram videt. Let's go ahead and take Julia out of the picture. and we'll take Sira out of the picture. We're going to move this sentence out of the way here, and we're going to bring Julius back home. Okay. Now Julius is a very powerful person, a very important person, and so of course he has a doorman. And when Julius comes home, he walks in, comes in the door, and then just keeps on going, right? And he leaves that door open. That's where the doorman comes in. Julius in Willam intrat. Julius in Willam intrat. Per ostium, through the door, et ostiarius post se, minime, non post se, that would be behind himself, but post eum. Who's this eum referring to? The eum is referring to Julius. It's referring to Julius. So post eum, the ostiarius closes the door, ostium claudit, post eum. Eum is Julius. So quickly in summary here, when we want to talk about someone who is doing something to him or herself, like in this case, Sira is looking at herself in the mirror, we use se. Sira in speculo se videt. When we want to talk about someone doing something not to himself or herself, but rather to someone else, we use the pronouns eum or eam, or of course the proper nouns in the accusative case. So we would say, for example, in this case, Quintus Marcum videt. We can see here is Quintus here, and he Marcum videt. And of course, if we wanted to use a pronoun, we would, I can't get my sentence out here, so, but what the sentence is supposed to say is Quintus eum videt. Quintus eum videt. This video is getting a little bit long, so if you'd wanted to pause at this point and take a break, this would be a great place to do it. Now, however, we're going to talk about num versus nonne. Num and nonne are simply two different ways of asking questions. When you ask the question num, the answer you're expecting is no. You're expecting a no answer. In other words, a negative response. So, for example, if I were to go outside and see the sun is shining like this, and I were to ask the question, it's not raining outside, is it? Your answer would be, no, it's not raining. The answer would be negative. And of course, I saw the sun shining, and I expected the answer to be no. Right? So when we have our friend Julia here, and she asks the question, num nasus meus foedus est Sira? What she's asking is, my nose isn't ugly, is it? And of course, she expects Sira to give her the answer, no, of course your nose isn't ugly. Nonne, on the other hand, is a question that you ask when you're expecting a yes answer, like, or in other words, an affirmative response. So, for example, if I were to ask the question, The Lord of the Rings is an awesome book, isn't it? Or an awesome movie, if you prefer, isn't it? Of course, my expectation is that your answer is going to be, yes, it's awesome, right? It's a great one. So, when our friend Sira, of course I can't get my picture again, so we'll just leave it out. When Sira asks, or says to Julia, nasus tuus tam formosus est quam meus. Your nose is as beautiful as mine. And then she says, nonne formosus est nasus meus. She's not expecting Julia to tell her how ugly her nose is. She's expecting Julia to say, yes, of course your nose is beautiful, right? But we all know that that isn't the case, poor Sira. Her nose is not all that beautiful. In summary, we use the question word num when we're expecting a negative response, and nonne when we're expecting an affirmative response. Now we're moving on to our final point, and this is actually three examples of this final point. These are points of style, and our first point of style is et, which simply means both and. Both and. How does this work? Well, when Julius comes home, Julius gives an apple to Marcus. Julius Marco malum dat. Right? But he also has another son, Quintus, so he gives one to Quintus also. Julius quinto malum dat. And of course, now that both of the boys have apples, we can say Julius et Marco et quinto malum dat. This et and this et simply mean Julius gives an apple both to Marcus and to Quintus. Our next point of style is, let me erase that line. Our next point of style is neque neque, which simply means neither nor. So let's see how this works. The poor male slaves that carried the bags home that had all the apples in them didn't get apples initially, did they? Leander malum non habet. And Cyrus, who also carried apples home, Cyrus malum non habet. Neither of them have apples. So in other words, neque Leander, neque Cyrus mala habent. It becomes habent because we're talking about Leander et Cyrus. So neque Leander, neque Cyrus mala habent. Neither Leander nor Cyrus mala habent. Our final point of style is this really cool one. Non solum sed etiam. This is really common both in English and in Latin, and you may recognize it. It simply means not only, but also. Not only, but also. Let's see how this works. So if we say Julius mala in sacco suo habet, Julius pira in sacco suo habet. So we are in a situation now where Julius has not only apples, but also pears. How does that work in Latin? It works just like this. Julius non solum mala, sed etiam pira in sacco habet. And there they are. That brings us to the conclusion of this rather long lesson. In this lesson we talked about several things. We talked about se versus eum eam. We talked about num versus nonne. And we talked about several points of style, specifically et, both and, neque neque, neither nor, and not only but also, non solum sed etiam. I hope you found this helpful.